boys, bear with me on this one if you could. But you were talking about the attacking. Both you lads were talking about, three. You were talking about the attacking unit there, and we've got a great exponent on the podcast with us just now in Chris. You know, and he'll tell himself, good strikers, good front players can cover a multitude of sins in a team. They can get you out of jail when you're playing badly and win a game. I had a friend who said to me last week, this is the worst Celtic team in 30 years. Now, I thought that was maybe a wee bit harsh, given the guys that are in there. In fact, I do think it's harsh, given the guys that are in there, the service, the things that they've won, etc. We actually made a point of going back and having a look at the front players that Celtic have had now. I don't need to go through, we don't need to bother going through them all, right? But because he said 30 years, it actually ties in. I reported my first Celtic game 30 years ago. It's actually a good idea. You go through, for Tommy Burns' team, we all know about Cadeti, Van Hooijdonk, all of those guys, Wim's team. The successful teams, forget them, because we all know them, like you know, Martin's team with Chris and John Hartson and Larson, Strachan's teams with McDonald and Vennegoor, Hesselink and Maciek Zarawski, and then Angie's teams and Brendan's teams with Dembele and all those boys. But even the ones that really, so you think in the last 30 years, lads, the teams that have really, when it's really the wheels have fallen off, like John Barnes' team, say, for example, you know, they started the season scoring goals and then Henrik Larsson broke his leg and it fell off a cliff at the end, but they still had Moravcik, Larsson, Tommy Johnson, Ayo Berkovic, Mark Viduka, still had those guys. Think you when it fell away for the terrible days of at the end of Ronnie Dyler when it was Carlton Cole and Colin Kazim Richards and these characters. They still had Patrick Roberts, Tom Rogic, James Forrest, Lee Griffiths scored 40 goals that season. Ryan Christie. Still had guys like that they could call upon. At the end of when it went wrong for Neil Lennon's team, the second time when John Kennedy ended up taking over at the end and he finished miles behind Rangers, you still had Edward, Christie, Griffiths, El Yunusi. The only one I could find that was even comparable was Cartuck when Tony Mowbray's time, when you had like sort of Diamanti Camera and Fortuny and Morton Rasmussen. Remember names like that? But they still had Georges Samaras and Robbie Keane. Even within that, this current bunch would be the worst in 30 years, I would say. I don't think there's any argument with that. If you actually look at who they've got and you go through the last 3 decades, I don't think there's been a worse batch of front players at Celtic.
A mate of mine said to me just that the other day, Swan, he said, oh, this is getting to John Barnes proportions. I think the John Barnes team would batter the Celtic team, personally.
John Barnes team would Craig Burley and Paul Lambert. And, it's the attacking players, the attacking mistakes. Chris talks about it all the time. I'm not going to bore everyone. Kyogo has still not been replaced. And not only that, they sold Adamida.
Yeah, that was a big. I mean, if you go back, you know, to the Postecoglou team, they just played teams off the park.
Yeah,
that's what they did. High intensity football, out of the traps. You know, you think of the wide players, centre forwards. You had that Hattati trademark run, which we barely see anymore. And then Rodgers sort of adapted it a little bit, but you know, Celtic had, you know, Brendan Rodgers often talked about that pace up top. That was the way that Celtic were going to play. I mean, and now you look at the Celtic front line, you wonder, you sort of, you know, what is their identity? You know, in my career, the teams I played in, and you know, you've all watched a lot of football. It's quite a basic game, football, but how's your team going to score a goal? What's your style in the final third? And sort of back when you know, we played with two up, and I was the guy who'd sort of sacrificed myself a little bit, and you'd play Henrik Larsson a little bit higher. Why would you play him a little bit higher? Because he was quicker than me, and he was a devastating finisher. But we would have that sort of combination play and that understanding of how we would play twin striker play. Or, you know, my job would be, you know, if players had it in the wide area, to make sure I'd get across on the side of the ball, work hard, and I'd always know, you know, that Henrik would be on my inside shoulder. I don't actually know. It's like at this moment in time, Yang is, you know, he's been okay this season, but everything seems to be off the cuff. I actually think when James Forrest comes on, and he's barely played this season, I actually think that in the final third, that Celtic do look more threatening, but he's He's nearly 50, poor James, isn't he? You've got Days and Maida off the other side when he plays off the other side. They all have their deficiencies. Whose product is his product? His end product is his end product. It's always been like that. But he's had a particularly poor season. But the centre forward situation is an absolute shambles. And Craig's mentioned all the strikers that Celtic have had over the years. How can the club be in a position where they are, this is part-time stuff? It really is. It's absolutely amateur hour. And I think you can see the frustration in Martin's face yesterday, and he's doing his best to get by. But I think yesterday was one where he realised it was coming. I heard him talk before the game, and because of recent the performances against Rangers, because of the victory against Motherwell, and I'm not saying Celtic were fortunate against Motherwell, but that was 1-1 until late on. But even before the game, when I think Luke Shanley and you guys probably asked him the same thing on the presser, I didn't listen to what he said in his sort of sit-down presser at the weekend, but he was never getting carried away and talked about, oh, we've got momentum now and this real belief we're going to go there. We feel it. It's the complete opposite of that. And why is it like that? Because he knows the team is crap at times, and that's the problem. And then after the game, it's about Celtic have to win 7 games. That's what we probably all think, maybe 6 and a draw. But are Celtic really capable of doing that? And we all know the answer. The thing that Celtic have on their side is, I think, that Hearts are similar. They could lose games, and so are Rangers. So anything's possible. I think it's the most interesting. I never quite knew what to make of the split. I never quite knew what to make of the split. The split is the split, of course. But this season, I do think it's going to be epic, because previous years you always thought, well, Celtic could win this. Celtic could beat everybody after the split. But I mean, everybody's capable of beating each other, and that's what Celtic can cling to, really. But I actually thought, going into the game at Tannadice at the weekend, I actually thought that Dundee, the next game up in Dundee, was going to be maybe a harder one. And I mean, that's a monumental game. It really is for Celtic.